Good morning, everybody. This is Paul Carruthers. I'm the communications manager for MotoAmerica, and this is a MotoAmerica's weekly podcast, Off Track. I'm joined, as always, by Sean Bice, who's in Ohio. I'm out here in California, and we're going to introduce a guest in a minute who's all the way across the pond in England. Hopefully our connection stays good. We've had a little bit of an issue this morning with it, but we're going to give it a go anyways, because I think talking to Michael Hill is always worth the effort. Michael is our MotoAmerica Live Plus. He's actually one of the two voices of MotoAmerica Live Plus. Anybody that's been to a World Superbike race at Laguna Seca is probably familiar with his work in the Paddock Show, where he entertains fans. I don't know how he does it, Sean, but he basically talks nonstop for, it seems like, 12 hours, perhaps. I could imagine you doing that, but I don't think I could do it. So Michael does a good job at the races, for our races, for MotoAmerica, for entertaining the fans, and also, again, seemingly talking all day long on MotoAmerica Live Plus. That's our live streaming that covers every class, every session, every race, from Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So, Sean, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to talking to Michael. You know, unlike us, Paul, I mean, we have gone to our test at Barber Motorsports Park for the preseason, but it'll be interesting to get a take on what's out there as far as racing, because Michael attended the MotoGP race in Qatar, and before that, of course, the World Superbike in Phillip Island in Australia. So he has been at least to a couple of races and can tell us a little bit about how that MotoGP thing was. That wasn't really MotoGP because it was only Moto2 and Moto3. So I'm anxious to talk to him. But yeah, like you said, it's a little tricky with the connections. I think because everyone's home, it seems like everybody's using stealing the Wi-Fi bandwidth or something, because my Wi-Fi is a lot less than it was. So, or a lot slower than it was.
Yeah, I guess good Wi-Fi is like toilet paper at this point.
That's right. That's right.
All right, let's bring Michael in.
Hey guys, how are you? Thank you for inviting me. And can we not talk about toilet paper? I've just come back from the supermarket, and that was like hell on earth. So let's leave the toilet paper talk for another time, eh?
We're actually grocery shopping at the same time because I just got back as well.
No, it's a crazy situation that everyone's in. So yeah, I mean, I hope first and foremost that all the fans of MotoAmerica and racing around the world are staying safe and sticking to the guidelines, and let's hope that we just get back racing soon.
Well, you're one of the few people in the world that actually have seen some motorcycle races this year, so maybe we can start with that. But you're fortunate enough to be in Phillip Island for, well, actually 3 incredible races with the World Superbike Championship, and then you were able to go to Qatar, and you didn't get to see MotoGP, obviously, but you got to see 2 very good races in Moto2 and Moto3. So talk to us a little bit about your worldly travels, at least until things got shut down.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think anyone that was watching at the beginning of the season, I mean, those opening races for World Superbike, that was proper Superbike racing. You know, there was so much hype over the winter with different riders changing teams and Scott Redding joining the championship. And then, of course, from the American standpoint, Garrett Gerloff obviously got the chance to ride with GRT, and there's so much anticipation for those opening races. And I've got to say, it was just a pleasure to be back in Phillip Island. It's such an iconic track. The fans there were great. The weather was great. And the racing in all the categories was fantastic. I can't remember the start of a World Superbike Championship. And I think I've been in the paddock for about 10 years now. I can't remember just people, leaving the paddock at the end of the day with big smiles on their faces, coming in ready for the first race on Saturday with even bigger smiles. And it was just a great way to start. I mean, the whole Corona thing wasn't really being talked about when we first landed in Phillip Island. I was there probably a week or so before the event, because we have the preseason test there and all the photo shooting and things like that. So it was very much just business as normal. Land in Australia, land in Melbourne, travel to the circuit, It was just like any normal start to the season. And then sort of, I think it was round about sort of Saturday afternoon, there was a few little whispers. And then obviously they made the announcement that that MotoGP wasn't going to happen, that they were only going to race Moto2 and Moto3. But from the World Superbike point of view, there was no difference. It was a normal weekend. It was no difference. You wouldn't say by walking through the paddock there was no issues whatsoever. Then obviously the week after was meant to be MotoGP. I'm fortunate enough that I work for the circuit there, doing the commentary around the circuit, but also they build like a huge big stage, a little bit like the World Superbike paddock show, but it's more for entertaining the guests in their VIP village. And from literally getting on the plane in Melbourne on the Monday evening, they said everything's going ahead as normal. The only difference is we won't have the MotoGP race, but everything's the same. So got on the plane, landed in Qatar. And then from the minute we landed in Qatar, it was like walking into a ghost town. I mean, I don't know if you guys have transited through Doha, but normally it's a really, really busy hub. There's people everywhere, with flights traveling in and out all over the place. And from getting off the plane, there was literally 6 or 7 of us in a queue to go through immigration. Alex Lowe's was just in front of me with his wife. There's a couple of Italian photographers who got taken off into a side room and interrogated. And then obviously they let us come into Qatar. Once we kind of exited the airport and got into the sort of the hire car, etc., going into the city of Doha, it just seemed like a normal Monday morning. Like we landed at sort of 6:30 in the morning. It was like a normal day. People going to work, no big dramas. It didn't feel any different. The airport definitely felt quieter, but it didn't feel any different. And then, as I said, the next day we went to the circuit, or I went to the circuit for the first time. And that's when you could really tell the difference. They announced that they weren't going to let the paddock open. There were the only people allowed in the paddock were people that were either team members, or personnel. The paddock in Qatar is normally open to guests with the right pass, but credentials and things like that, it was all closed down. They then said that they were going to try to still maintain the sort of the meet and greet and the fan interactions with some of the riders that had been planned. That all then got cancelled. It was a really surreal experience. I mean, you guys have been in the paddocks the same as me for many, many years, and it's normally a bustling place. I mean, MotoGP is maybe a little bit more of a closed paddock than usual in any event anyway. But it was just a really surreal experience, sort of driving into the circuits. The only people around there were teams. Nobody was really leaving the pit garages. Everyone just tried to, or seemed to just be keeping themselves to themselves. The media center was half empty. I mean, there were still quite a lot of journalists and photographers there, but certainly a lot of people that would have normally made the journey from Italy, for example, they weren't there at all because the Qatar government blocked all flights and anybody from Italy arriving into the country. So from that side, it was a bit surreal. But from a racing standpoint, the racing was great. They also ran 2 races of the Asia Talent Cup, and all 4 races at Qatar provided photo finishes. It was a semi Phillip Island. We had, sort of the second and third closest races in history, the 5th closest podium of all time. So, it seems strange to be talking to you guys here from central London. And, I've been outside probably once a day for the last week. We can't really go anywhere. It's after such a great start to the season. It's all come crashing down around us. But, all we can do, as I said, is follow the advice and hopefully we go racing soon. But it seems every day you switch on the laptop and things are being changed. We've had races postponed from World Superbike. There's been another postponement this morning of the race in Jerez from MotoGP. MotoAmerica's had to postpone or change the date of their first race in Qatar. They've now had to change Atlanta as well. So, I'm sure we will get racing. It's just a waiting game, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like everything's just going to be pushed back. Tell us a little bit about back to World Superbike for a second. Do you think that the series is Phillip Island a good representation of how the series will be, or is it just a Phillip Island thing as far as how close it was?
Now that's a really good question. This is something that I talked about on the stage with the fans. We've made a few changes this year to be even more interactive with the fans, if that's possible. But we've rolled out a few new things in Phillip Island. That was one of the discussions that we had, where we said, look, Phillip Island always produces close racing, and then historically you go to other circuits where the gaps don't materialize. And my sort of answer to that was that I think it is indicative of what we can expect through the season. I went testing with a lot of the guys in Jerez at the start of the year, which is something I've never done for a few years. And again, even though we had mixed conditions, the times were very close. And looking at the pre-season in November, looking in Portimao in February, or in January rather, the times were very close. We had 7 or 8 guys within a second. Phillip Island always produces close racing, but to counter that, I would say look at the races that we had in Phillip Island in 2019. Alvaro Bautista was practically halfway back to Melbourne before anybody else crossed the line. And then that wasn't necessarily indicative of how the season ended because he lost the World Championship. So it's a good question. I'd like to think, only because I'm so close to the championship and to witness those races firsthand. I mean, it was elbow barging and some of the most entertaining races and overtakes that I think we've seen on track in World Superbike for 4 or 5 years. I think everybody watching would agree that. I was hoping that it would have been, we only have to wait an extra week and then we would have had round 2 in Qatar, but we didn't get that. So I'm going to say yes. I think it is indicative. Whether we're going to get 8 or 9 riders together as close as that in every race, maybe not. But I definitely think we're going to get a leading group of 5 or 6 in most races. That would be my gut feeling.
The other thing I want to ask you about World Superbike before we move on is what are people thinking about Garrett? I mean, he's our boy over there this year. Obviously, we have very high hopes for him. We know he's full of talent. He started to do really well here last year in MotoAmerica, and then he's moved on to World Superbike. I thought he showed well, but obviously I'm curious to see what the feeling was about him from within that paddock.
Yeah, I mean, well, as you know, I've known Garrett as well for a few years. When you guys have always accompanied World Superbike at Monterey at Laguna Seca. So, no, I think Garrett's clearly a talent. The thing I like about Garrett as well is he's such a cool guy off the track as well. So, he was, I wouldn't say thrown in at the deep end, but obviously round 1 in Phillip Island is slightly different to a normal World Superbike weekend in terms of the extra off-track things that they have to do. There's filming for a couple of days, then we have the 2-day test, then we have all the season photographs on the grid, and these things take a lot of time. And then also, because we only go to Australia once a year, similar to when we go to America, any first-time rider we bring on the stage more. So there's a lot of things that he had to contend with. I think some of his leathers didn't arrive on time, and things like that were lost in transit on the way. So a whole host of things going on. But I think he did a really, really good job. And I think that, yes, okay, you can argue that he only scored a couple of points. But looking at that first race, he passed 10 people in the first lap and a half, which the last time anybody that I remember doing that would have been Jonathan Rea when we used to have the reverse grid, I think what caught him out a little bit in race 1 on the Saturday, if I'm being honest, and probably he would admit it as well, is his inexperience with the Pirelli tyres. He was comfortably running inside the top 7 or 8 for the first 5 or 6 laps. And then, the last 4 or 5 laps, if you look at his lap time on the data sheet, I spend a lot of time just looking at the analytics, his lap times were 3 to 4 seconds off the pace. So he clearly just burned the tyres out. But that will come with experience. I think what he showed in race 1 is that he is capable. In Jerez, he was inside the top 3 in testing in the rain. He never, unfortunately, got the chance on the Sunday to show what he could have done in the sprint race or what he could have done in race 2, because there was a bit of an incident on track in the morning warm-up and he got taken out by Sandro Cortese and then never got to race. So I think if he had have raced, I think he could have... I'm not sure he would have been in the top 9 in the sprint race, but I think he would have had a better race in the sprint race because I don't think he would have burned the tyre out. And I think he could have come away from Phillip Island with a top 10, which would have been, I think, a reasonable result. I think when we get back into Europe and we get to tracks that he's tested at, I honestly think he'll be one to watch. And there was a lot of support from him in the paddock, not just in terms of the way he was on track, but when he was introduced on the stage, the fans seemed to like the fact that there was another nationality back in the championship. It's been a while since we've had a full-time American in the championship. Obviously, Jake Gagne, the last rider, and then prior to that, obviously, the late Nicky Hayden. So I think the fact that we've got an American in the championship is good, and he's a fast American, and he's still really, really young, So I think he just needs to keep his nose clean. I mean, the crash in the warm-up wasn't his fault, so that's racing. It's frustrating, but it wasn't his fault. I think he can, once we do go racing again, he just needs to keep learning and keep showing what he's doing, and hopefully he'll stay on the grid for 2021, because that's also the problem which we've talked about before. I remember talking to you guys in Road America last year, and it's all well and good new nationalities coming into the championship, but you need more than 1 year, as you guys know. Coming to Europe, it's a different way of life. It's not, even though they may speak the same language and we speak English a lot, it is a completely different way of life. So, he doesn't know all of the circuits. He needs to learn, finish the races, do a good job, which I think he's doing. And, for me, I think it's early to say he should be on the grid in 2021, but I think he should, is my personal opinion. I think he deserves more than 1 year.
Michael, I want to ask you, continuing with Garrett Gerloff a little bit, regarding the fact that they seem to make no bones on that team, or within the hierarchy of Yamaha. They call it the junior team, and I don't really understand quite why that is. I mean, I understand that Garrett's a rookie to the series, so maybe that's part of it. But from what you understand, is the bike that Garrett has different than like what Toprak has, what the the main Pata team has? Is there kind of a step down between in machinery at all? Do you know?
Yeah, so I mean, from my understanding, just to answer the first part in terms of why it's called the junior team, my understanding is, and again, I hope I get this right, but my understanding is that the GRT team, if you remember last year, they ran Marco Melandri and Sandro Cortese, so kind of a more experienced Superbike rider with a Superbike rookie in terms of Sandro, who obviously just won the World Supersport Championship. My understanding is the way that they've structured, or Yamaha have structured, is they now have the factory team with Toprak and with Michael van der Mark. They're running the full spec 2020 bikes, etc. They've then got the GRT junior team, which is in essence the feeder team to that Pata Yamaha team. I understand that they're running, whether they're going to be on these bikes the whole year, I don't know, but they're starting the season with the 2019 full spec bikes. So it's not like a hybrid bike or a standard 2020 bike. It's the full spec bikes from 2019 is what I'm led to believe. Whether they upgrade through the year, I don't know. And then obviously from a Yamaha standpoint, you've then got the Tenkate Yamaha, which are receiving support from Japan, but they're also doing a lot of in-house development themselves. And again, I'm not sure exactly what in-house development they're doing. I think it's more to do with chassis and suspension and things like that. But, I'm not fully aware of what they're doing. But from what I can gather, if you look further down the Yamaha structure, they've now obviously introduced the R3 Cup, which is for 12 to 15-year-olds. You've then got the Blue Crew Challenge, which is a championship or a challenge within the Supersport 300s. So what I can see is that it's kind of a stepping stone. So you've got the youngsters in the R3 Cup, then you've got the Blue Crew Challenge. Then in World Supersport, you've still got the Blue Crew kind of progression, if you like, with Andy Verdoya and Galang Hendra Pratama, who did World Supersport 300. They've moved up. And then the logical thing for me is that you look at the likes of Federico Caricasulo and Garrett Gerloff, that potentially they're being groomed and honed, that they're going to get some good factory support. They're on the radar of Yamaha, and when there's a change at the top, they kind of move up, kind of like what they've done with MotoGP, with obviously Valentino being replaced, or potentially being replaced. Well, he has been replaced, hasn't he, for 2021? That's the deal's done. So it'll be Maverick and Fabio will move up from the Sepang team. So that's my understanding of how it is. Definitely the bikes that they were testing in Jerez were the 2019 bikes. Whether they upgrade through the season, I don't know. But I mean, you could see from Garrett's pace in Phillip Island in that first race, his race lap was as quick as the guys that were on the podium, if you look at the individual best lap. So the 2019 bikes, the full spec bikes, are not slow. I mean, Melandri was on the podium in Phillip Island last year on that bike. So if you do a like for like comparison between Garrett's time and Marco's time, there's very little between them. So for all the American fans and for Garrett and for you guys, That's what I would be looking at. You can compare it against Toprak or Michael van der Mark, because naturally they're the benchmark. But if they're running the 2019 bikes, surely the benchmark for Garrett is to look at what Marco was doing, what Sandro was doing 12 months ago. And if you're as quick or you're quicker than that, then you're doing a good job.
That's a really good way to explain that, Michael. And I'm glad you did that, because it is kind of a little hard to figure out. It sounds to me like it's similar to how they've been how they were previously with MotoGP and their relationship with Tech 3, and how, Tech 3 sort of used previous iterations of the YZR, YZR M1. And so it's the same kind of thing, I guess. If Tech 3 beat like the big Yamaha MotoGP team, would be the same thing as a junior team rider beating the team beating like Toprak and Michael van der Mark. Obviously, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's probably a good analogy there. Do you think Tech 3 with MotoGP, or the way it was with Tech 3, I should say?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's how I would look at it. I mean, there's always going to be the argument that everyone should be on the same bike. In an ideal world, you'd get that, but that's motorsport, and that's how it works. But I like I said, going back to what I said about Garrett, it's so strange, because it's Sonoma last year. I think it was the second or third MotoAmerica race that I did, and we actually took Garrett up into the grandstand, and we started doing an interview with him, and one of the questions I said to him was, when are you going to come to World Superbike? And I kind of said it tongue in cheek, just to try and get a reaction from him. And then lo and behold, 3 months later, he signs the deal. So I might take a bit of credit for that. Maybe I just
maybe a percentage of the money.
Yeah, that would be nice, right? That would be nice.
Hey, Michael, let's switch gears a little bit. So you were talking, about Qatar, and it's kind of ironic that the two rounds that you saw, and the two, the one round of World Superbike, the one round of MotoGP, which was Moto2 and Moto3, happened to be a situation where, for us here in the United States, I mean, it sort of, in our mind, showcased Garrett's talent a little bit at Phillip Island. Same thing with Qatar and Joe Roberts, and we had him on last week. It was great to talk to him. We talked about when he raced in our series and won the championship in 2015. And one of the things we discussed is, do you have to kind of learn how to win? And Joe sort of felt that way. He said it's strange about with winning, once you get a hang of it, you start to do it more. And we were hopeful of what he was going to do this year, but boy, he just did such a great job in that first Moto2 round, and you were there. Tell us about that. And did you personally expect to see Joe make this jump compared to what he's been doing, the past year or so in the series?
Yeah, again, a really good question. I mean, I know Joe really well from not just from his time in MotoAmerica, but also when he was in the Spanish Championship, the FIM CV Repsol Championship. He was racing, obviously, at the same time as Jason Uribe. So there was a couple of Americans that made that transition across. Hand on heart, and being honest, and I spoke to Joe in Qatar. No disrespect to Joe, but the jump from where he was and where the team was, which I think is an important point here, to the front, was a shock. I think it shocked a lot of people in the paddock. But for me, it was a pleasant surprise, because I think in the press conference in Qatar, somebody said, look, if you look at Joe Roberts off the track, he doesn't look anything like a motorbike racer. He's the most laid-back guy, just ambling through the paddock. Nothing's too much of a drama. He's really chilled. But you put the helmet on him, and the guy can ride a bike. And I was really, really pleased for him. The fact that he was quick in practice, then he went and got the pole position, and whether he got on the podium or he didn't. For me, the ride of the race, and I'm not just saying this because we're doing the podcast, I genuinely believe there was two standouts for me in that race. One was Joe Roberts, because it's the first time that he's obviously raced in contention for the podium, and he was there on his own merits. It wasn't like half a dozen people fell off and he inherited fourth position. He was there throughout. And the second rider, which I also think is one to watch for this season, was Remy Gardner, because he got beaten up left, right, and centre at the beginning of the weekend. 2 monster crashes. He got pushed back in the race, but obviously he preserved his tyres, and he came through towards the end of the race. So I think we're at that time now. Going into 2020, you could also throw Bo Benschneider into that mix as well. He qualified 5th after having been nowhere last year, and I think he was teammates last year with Joe. So I think we're in for the turning of the tide. You're going to have this all the time, aren't you? Where you get the riders that you expect to be at the front, and then every year or every couple of years you get the odd name that just pops up. Can Ben Schneider be there the whole season? I'm not sure. Remy's proved that he can be, but sometimes makes mistakes and crashes, but he's going to learn. I think Joe could be there all season. I really, really do. And I think one of the nice things of this whole story with the American racing team is the inclusion now of John Hopkins. And it was so nice to see John back in the paddock, and he was sat just in front of me in the press conference. And again, I had a bit of a chat to him and how's things going. And John Hopkins said something really interesting to me, which was one of the only things that Joe was missing was self-belief. And how many times have we all talked about it, whether we're having a beer or dinner, or we're just talking in the paddock, where racing is 90% in your head. And whatever they've done in that team, whatever people are now around Joe Roberts, Joe believes. And when you believe, you can ride fast. And, don't want to, I'm not a betting man, but I would bet, providing we go racing this year and this whole Corona thing blows over, I think Joe Roberts can get podiums. Whether he can win a race this year, I don't know, but he can get podiums for sure.
Let's continue. So Joe Roberts, like I said, was in our series in MotoAmerica and won the championship in 15 and had, I think it was like a nine wins that season. So we had our test at Barber, and we're certainly looking forward to when our season kicks off. Possibly, it looks like VIR is going to be a possibility for the start. I think, Road America is one that we're looking towards too. And it's funny, I remember the last time we did the podcast with you, it was in person on camera at Road America, and that was kind of your first time in our paddock. So you're going to be doing the same thing this year with us, and we're looking forward to that a lot. You've added a lot to our series with your commentary, and I know the thing that I'm always amazed and want to ask you about, Michael, is I think Paul for sure, me a little bit, and I know clearly you keep your eyes on a lot of series around the world, and I'm sure you're pretty deeply steeped in British Superbike too. But when you come in, how do you keep these riders straight? I mean, even some of the riders that are very new in Junior Cup and MotoAmerica, you knew who they were. You already reached out to them. So how do you keep all these riders straight among all these series? I think I just have to flat out ask you, how does that work for you?
Well, I guess now everyone's in quarantine, my secret's out, because this is just like normal life for me. Like, I don't have any friends. I don't go out. I just sit there reading. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. No, it's, I think I've always been interested in racing, as you guys know. I've always loved two-wheel sport, and I think we've documented it even on the MotoAmerica Live Plus last year that Wayne Rainey was my hero, and meeting him in 1989 when he raced for the Lucky Strike Yamaha at Donington Park was one of the reasons that I used to pester my dad to take me to the races. So I've always been involved in racing. I've loved racing ever since I can remember, and when you get an opportunity, as you guys know from working in the industry, there are so many people that want to work in the industry, and so many people that have a talent, whether it's being a journalist, whether it's being a commentator or presenter, or technicians, mechanics, whatever it is. There's so many people that want to be in a racing paddock around the world, and I was very lucky to get the opportunity with Infront and World Superbike. When I was still a teenager, just doing grid walks, and long before Twitter and everything came along, and doing more radio based stuff. And I've just always applied myself 100% to whatever it was that I was doing. And as I said, I'm really fortunate that I now have a job and a career in a sport that I absolutely love. And I think that's not just the same for motorsport. You could see around the world all the different jobs in the world. If you're doing a job that you love, it's not a job, it becomes a pleasure. And for me, when I got the chance to obviously expand my role within World Superbike, I jumped at it. That led to opportunities in MotoGP, and then when you get the opportunity to work for Wayne and for Chuck, and to work with you guys, especially back at the beginning when it was because of Wayne that I got the sort of the racing bug, as it were. It was one of those things that I always just like just to give 100%. So the last thing I wanted to do coming out to Road America last year was to kind of just sit back and rest on my laurels and be like, look, everybody knows what I do, or a lot of people know what I do, without sounding big-headed or arrogant in World Superbike. But the proposition or the work that I'm doing with you guys is slightly different. So it had been a while since I'd done just pure commentary and TV work. So I just took that extra bit of time just to reach out to riders that I knew and reach out to various team managers and say, look, hey, I'm going to be involved. Can we do this? Can I have 5-10 minutes to chat to you guys? And I think coming to Road America was a big eye opener for me, because you hear a lot of people and you read a lot of things on the internet about what's the series like? Is it going to be any good? What are the teams like? What's life in the paddock like? And it is different. It's very different to World Superbike, but World Superbike is different to BSB, which is it's different to MotoGP. And I think it was nice for me to come to Road America. It was a track that I'd never been to before, so having that aspect of going around the tracks and learning all the tracks as well from a commentary point, I think is important. But I think the short answer to your question, Sean, is that I love my job, and I've had a lot of people that have said over the years, "Oh, you clearly can tell," but I do genuinely love my job, and I think I don't have to do that. I don't have to make as many conversations with riders or teams. I could kind of just wing it, but I like to think that we're putting on a show, whether I'm the commentator or whether we're doing something in the paddock, or whether the guys on track are all still putting on a show. It's entertainment, so I just feel a little bit not responsible. That's not probably the right word. Maybe it is. I just feel responsible that I've been trusted to put on a show along with Robbie and the guys on MotoAmerica Live Plus, and I think it's our duty to do that. And everybody works differently. Robbie has his own way of doing things, and Jonathan Green has his own way of doing things, and I just do my thing, and I just apply that to whatever championship I'm in, and hopefully you guys enjoy it, and the fans enjoy it, and that's the important thing.
Yeah, we do, and I know the fans do too. So, hey, we're doing well with this podcast. We're getting towards the end, but I did want to fit in one more question about our series. So I'm going to use a term that's a decidedly British term, I think, and it's the all change. You guys say all change, and that was a little bit of the case. Not all change, but quite a bit of change this year heading into this season regarding Superbike and MotoAmerica Superbike. And, we kind of got a taste of what it was going to be like at the test. We weren't sure how it was going to work with Cameron and Jake on the attack team. And it seems like they're same as they were. It doesn't seem a whole lot different. An even bigger thing seems to be M4 X-Star Suzuki and Tony with Bobby Fong moving up with those guys as teammates. And, that team looks to be really good too. I know Tony did a ton of laps in all kinds of, all the weather conditions that we had at Barber. So he really was working on the bike pretty hard. What do you think, even with that sort of all change this year, do you think that those players are going to be the ones involved? And what do you think the chances are, from what you know of our series and what you've seen of Tony? Do you think he can snap back and snatch it away from Cameron this year, despite the fact that there's been a few changes with regard to how the teams are made up?
Yeah, no, I mean, first and foremost, I think MotoAmerica over the last few years has done a great job, and it continues to grow. And I think if you look at the entry lists from Superbike, you guys have got 6 manufacturers. There's a few new names in there. You've got quite a few young riders on the grid this year in Superbike. I mean, Ashton Yates, for example, he's going to be riding one of the new Hondas. And that bike is quick. I don't know what specification he's going to have, but if it's anything like the bike that Bautista and Haslam's got in World Superbike, it's going to be quick. You've got a couple of Ducatis on the grid now. Obviously, Kyle Wyman, he learned a ton last year. And, it's not easy to take a new bike with no development and to get it working for the tracks. The tracks that bike was developed for were World Championship racing tracks. And, I'm not knocking any of the tracks that we go to in MotoAmerica, but the nature of the circuit is very different. Sonoma, Pittsburgh, they're not necessarily the same kind of tracks that bike would have tested on. So I think you can expect to see Kyle Wyman definitely spring a surprise. You've also got PJ Jacobson. A lot of people forget that PJ's got Superbike experience. He raced a couple of years in BSB with Taiko Suzuki. He's had a season in World Superbike. So PJ on the Ducati will be good. Tony for sure is going to be one of the championship favourites. Cameron will be a championship favourite. On paper, those two are if you had to pick two people who are your top two potentially for the title, they would be at the top. Whichever way round you put them, they're going to be there or thereabouts. You can't discount Jake Gagne. He had a bit of a rough time when he came to World Superbike. He had some injuries and arguably wasn't on a bike that allowed him to demonstrate what he could do. So he's proven in testing that he's not a million miles away. So, once he gets back up to speed, he's going to be in the mix. And then you've got the recent announcements. I mean, look at Josh Herrin. He's going to be back on the grid on the BMW. You've got other riders coming up as well through Superstock. So from a British point of view, Bradley Ward with David Anthony and that expanded team with Sam Federico. So I think you've got the riders at the top, which you can expect. But I think the midfield battle, I think, could be really, really good. You've mentioned Bobby Fong stepping up. I mean, we saw what he did last year and what he has done for a few years. He is going to be determined to prove a point. And you've also got other riders that we haven't really talked about. Matthew Scholz, he's been in the mix for a few years. He stayed with the same team with Westby, so he's going to be in the mix as well. Cam Peterson, he'll be there. But I think that the competitive nature of MotoAmerica doesn't just extend for me to Superbike this year. If you look at Supersport, there's a few riders that have moved on, okay? But then if you look down the entry list that we've seen, potentially Sean Dillon Kelly, he had a great debut season last year. He's still a teenager. We know how quick he is. Richie Escalante is going to be there or thereabouts. There's also other riders moving around as well. So we talk about you mentioned the Yamaha sort of pyramid or how it works for Garrett. You've also got that happening in MotoAmerica. If you look at a number of the riders that have moved from the 300s, for example. So Trevor Standish is one that springs to mind. He's now gone into the twins. You've also got from Supersport, Kevin Olmedo. I mean, he was on fire last year racing with Rocco Landers. He's moved into Supersport. Alex Dumas has gone into Stock 1000. Hunter Dunham, who's a tall kid, to be riding the 300. He dipped his toe in the water with Supersport. He's now gone into Superstock 1000. So I think once we get racing, and hopefully it is going to be at VIR, that'll be a new circuit for me. I've never been there before, so I'm looking forward to getting there and getting the season started. But I think we're in for one hell of a season. I really, really, really do. And I think that we're going to have 5 worthy champions at the end of it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really good, and it's going to be good to have you with us too. We're just about out of time, Michael. That went by pretty quickly, but I want to finish my part of it by saying, to everybody out there, thank you for listening to our podcast. Please subscribe to MotoAmerica Live Plus, our popular subscription streaming service that Michael Hill is very much a part of. And also don't forget to get your race weekend tickets. There's nothing like being there for our races. And to do that, you can go to motoamerica.com/buy for complete details. And I'm gonna hand it over to Paul right now to kind of sign us off here. So,
holy crap! I could have just stayed at the grocery store because I don't think I've ever spoken less in one of these podcasts than with you two clowns. I think I think if you two guys got together and did MotoAmerica Live Plus, we'd have to have like 5-day events.
Hey, I'm up for that, Sean. What do you reckon? Should we try that out at the first round? Let's get a couple of roving cameras and just go and sit in the grandstand and see how long we can keep going for.
Hey, anyways, Michael, I appreciate the time this morning. I want both you guys to stay safe and do the right things and do what you're supposed to do. And hopefully we'll all get back together here fairly soon and watch some motorcycle racing. But in the meantime, same to our fans out there. Everybody stay safe and keep your health. It's your number one thing. Health is your wealth. Remember that. And we'll talk again soon. But yeah, thanks, guys.